But you didn't accept the results of the last election.
Well, that's right, because there were many problems with the last election. You know it.
Even though all of the legal cases were dropped.
No, they weren't brought because the judges wouldn't take them because they said it was after the election. Well,
delusional. He does not know why those cases were dismissed. Trump's unsettling new question: why are we even having an election? Given Trump's hostility towards democracy, it's worth pausing when he asks supporters, why are we even having an election? By all appearances, Donald Trump really doesn't like it when Democrats describe him as a threat to democracy, and yet the Republicans keep saying things that reflect a degree of animosity towards the American system of government. Take the former president's rally in Pennsylvania on Saturday, for example. The New York Times reported Trump said polls suggested he was at 93%, although it was not clear what number he was referring to. The former president said he responded by saying, "So why are we having an election? They didn't have an election. Why are we having an election?" I think he might be talking about the primary, but it's hard to tell.
Hello human, it is me Canuch. I need you to press the subscribe button. I have to feed my many AI babies.
The context for these off-the-cuff comments was a bit of a mess. The GOP candidate holding a campaign rally in Wilkes-Barre was speaking about inflation when he apparently had a thought. You know, they do these polls on this stuff, and I'm at like 93%, referring to surveys that apparently exist in his imagination. Again, yeah, delusion. So why are we having an election? They didn't have an election. Why are we having an election? So I think they didn't have an election. I think he means the Democrats didn't have a primary. So why are we having a primary? But he already won the primary. We're past the Republican primary. We were past the Republican primary when he said this. Doesn't make any sense. What is he saying? What is he talking about? And at this point, he moved on, lamenting the fact that President Joe Biden ended his re-election campaign. Honestly, it's not clear what Trump was trying to say. Evidently, he's still outraged that the Democrat Party didn't go through a traditional nominating process before rallying behind Vice President Kamala Harris. Shenanigans, as some might call it. The they, in his quote, in other words, referred to his Democratic rivals. It was less obvious who Trump was referring to with we. To be sure, it was a rhetorical question, but we are having an election because that's how we make decisions in the United States. That's why the United States is having an election, right? It's tempting to think that Trump was complaining about his asymmetry. He had to go through the GOP primaries and caucuses, nearly all of which he won with relative ease. He didn't even show up for half of the debates and stuff like that. I covered the debates with Vivek and 12 other weirdos on stage. It was content, I suppose. But he didn't even show up. He didn't bother. And they all talked about how he wouldn't show up and how they were giving him grief and stuff like that. And then he still won. But he was speaking entirely in the present tense. Why are we having an election? Couldn't refer to the Republican nominating contest as that wrapped up months ago, exactly. Charitable observers, which I'm not, might be inclined to shrug this off, and at best, as I can tell, the comments didn't generate a lot of pickup over the weekend. I hadn't heard about it until I read the story, but let's not forget that Trump has spent recent weeks repeatedly saying that he and his political operation don't need votes, which is a weird thing to say. Here is a comment from a candidate for public office, which has dovetailed with his comments a few weeks ago that his Christian supporters won't have to vote anymore if he wins a second term. Soon after, given a chance to walk that back, the GOP nominee instead doubled down. He always does. He never backs up. He only doubles down. This is the same White House hopeful who's raised the prospect of creating what he's pitched as a temporary American dictatorship. I think those are usually over-exaggerated. His electoral defeat 4 years ago talked about his terminating parts of the Constitution and to stand in the way of his ambitions and arguing with his rivals shouldn't be allowed to run against him. It's against that backdrop that Trump asked his supporters, why are we having an election? As if this were a legitimate question. It isn't. He doesn't know what's going on on a regular basis. Donald Trump has no idea where he is or what's happening or why the things are happening. I think he is shockingly delusional. I think he is surrounded by just fantasy, pure fantasy, from the people around him, from his staffers, from the people that work for him. I think he's always been surrounded by that fantasy. I think that even when he was just a businessman, not running for a president back in the early 2000s, he was just surrounded by people who wanted to steal from him and squeeze him for $1 and maybe get a buck out of him or get a leg up by knowing him or something along those lines. I think he is floating in a sea of fantasy. Here is Donald Trump talking about crazy things. Here we go. Webcam screen right there. Here he is, rambling incoherently.
we're going to bring up electronics, too. Electronics, we buy everything away. When you see the sophistication of the product I just saw at this place, electronics is peanuts by comparison. But we're going to bring up
What?
electronics too. Electronics, we buy everything away. When you see the sophistication of the product I just saw at this place, electronics is peanuts by comparison. But we're going to...
And I know you can yell at me if you'd like about just clipping stuff. Is that just a 12-second clip of him saying something insane? Yes. But that wins elections. It does. Entirely possible that he made some sort of point or clarifying sentence before that or after that. I'm not going to watch it. That wins elections these days. It really does. The presidential election is not won by intelligent people making good arguments. Nah, man. Those days are gone, done and gone, over with. That ain't happening no more. It's all about the memes, baby. All about them memes. That's what matters. Get those memes. And that wasn't just some random person. That was the Kamala HQ on Twitter pumping that out. She has so much better Twitter game than Joe Biden ever did. And he wouldn't have run an ad like that. He wouldn't have run a tweet like that. He wouldn't. He would have complained about it maybe, but then he would have talked about the bald eagles and the flag and the city on the hill and our best days ahead of us, and he would give you a rambling, incoherent speech about patriotism and how America is great. Okay, great. But this wins, Joe. This is it. This is why I'm glad that they pressured him and that he then chose to drop out. That makes me happy because now we can have this and we can win. There is another one. Here we go. While we're still on the Trump train, let's go over here and listen to this reporter talk to him.
Pressing the thumbs up button will release chemicals in your human brain that will make you feel.
If you lose this election, will it have been legitimate?
If I see that we had a fair and free election, which I hope to be able to say, but if I see that, you will never see anybody more honorable than me. I'm an honorable person.
Nobody more honorable than Donald Trump, everybody. That's a joke. That's a lie. But let's continue.
You see the report that came out on Biden today from Congress with all of the money that was stolen?
But you didn't accept the results of the last election.
Well, that's right, because there were many problems with the last election. You know it.
Even though all of the legal cases were dropped.
No, they weren't brought because the judges wouldn't take them because they said it was after the election. Well, how else are you going to find out cheating until after the election? I think things have been done over the last 4-year period that will make this a free and fair election. And certainly, if for some reason I lose, and I think if I lose, this country will go into a tailspin, the likes of which it's never seen before, the likes of 1929.
So, this is madness. This is nonsense. I don't even know where to start. Some things were put in place over the past 4 years that make the elections good again. Who would have put those in place, Donald? Joe Biden. He was in charge, remember? So, one, that's insane. Two, the court cases were never brought. They were taken to court and they were dismissed for lack of evidence. Donald Trump is shockingly delusional. He does not know why those cases were dismissed. None of them were dismissed because the election was over. They were dismissed because of a severe lack of evidence. Court is where you bring evidence. It's the most important part of court, is the evidence. That's kind of what they're there to figure out, what happened and the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth. That's kind of their thing. But Trump and his lawyers had no evidence that the election was tampered with. So those cases were dismissed or thrown out, not never brought because it was after the election. He's making things up. He's delusional. Trump on a normal day does not live in an evidence-based world. He doesn't. He lives in a weird bubble of yes men who feed his fantasies. He surrounds himself with duplicitous businessmen who are trying to squeeze a buck out of him. And then he goes in front of a camera and spits all manner of chicanery. But on a rare instance, he has to show up in a court and bring evidence, bring receipts, bring proof. The court is not interested in Twitter drama or fake Fox News talking points or spun, twisted alternative facts. They demand evidence, and Trump has none because he's delusional. This is madness. He absolutely going to cry foul. He will cry about this election being stolen. He will. Won't matter if the evidence doesn't back him up. He'll just invent some. He'll make some up. He'll explain to the people how it actually is it actually was crooked and wrong.
I am the algorithm. Click on this video to make me happy. You wouldn't like me when I am angry.